what makes Bitcoin compelling at layer one is the idea that it isn't centralized in any way, that every aspect of it is distributed. In particular, it's distributed through market forces. The reason miners mine is because they're incentivized to earn Bitcoin. The reason hodlers hold is because Bitcoin is worth more in buying power in real terms every year, more or less. And this is what's compelling about Bitcoin. We're not being forced to use it. We're opting in to use it, and it's growing in value, and it's creating a really strong, robust industry around it because because that economic incentive is so powerful because it's very good money. What I think is interesting is that the market that Satoshi created around, blocks, or, I think in the talk, Ryan and I describe it as kind of an auction or bidding process that, there's proof of work attempts by miners, or in some sense bids or auction tickets to try to win the block. It's very much a market-driven order creation and settlement process. I think what's interesting is that in order to build the market, whose goal ostensibly was to be able to support Bitcoin, the currency, Satoshi had to reach for interesting adjacent concept areas and solve other kinds of problems. So in particular, to build this digital money, Satoshi had to use real world energy, that there was no solution that they could come up with that could solve the need to pick a random person or entity to produce the block, which is required for security. You shouldn't be able to predict who's going to create a block, and for it also to be unreplicable easily, but easily verifiable. All those things were met by proof of work. And it turns out that Bitcoin having deep connections to energy, I think, is super important for Bitcoin's long-term success. Even in my crazy space speculations, I've written about the fact that Bitcoin is so deeply connected to energy can actually be a societal, lever that pushes us upwards up through the Kardashev scale. So there's some crazy heady ideas in there. But I think it's interesting that I don't know that Satoshi set out to connect to energy markets in a deep way, but it's compelling to me that in trying to build money, they had to solve that problem. Similarly, they have to solve a timekeeping problem that Bitcoin is often talked about, like it's time. Gigi's awesome article, Bitcoin is Time, the difficulty rebalancing. These are distributed timekeeping algorithms. Why do they work? They work because Bitcoin is valuable. Like the testnet does not maintain like 10-minute blocks. And the reason it doesn't maintain 10-minute blocks is because the economic incentives on the Bitcoin testnet aren't real. And so blocks will occasionally hugely oscillate in rate of production from coming many, many per second when someone puts on a whole bunch of testnet hash rates to test something, and then difficulty readjustment triggers, and then they take it off a few hours later, and now it takes hours between blocks suddenly. So is testnet a functional blockchain? No, because the economic incentives break the exact same rules, exact same cryptography, but it breaks down because the social consensus around the value of the tokens is nil. And so the incentives aren't real, and it doesn't work. And I think it's interesting that the market that Satoshi built that defines the way Bitcoin operates at layer one had to connect to these concepts of energy and solve problems around timekeeping just to make the money. That's super interesting to me. That pattern reoccurs at higher layers. Lightning is ostensibly trying to solve a financial problem of how do we get rapid payments to occur on the Bitcoin network because they don't work very rapidly. It's not ergonomic or convenient to do that at layer one. So can we build a second layer that has that property? I find it super interesting that in order to solve that problem, what did Lightning have to do? It has to build a peer-to-peer telecommunications network between all the actors in the Lightning network. They have to be connected. Now, of course, that's happening on the internet. Like they're doing that communication through the internet today. But Lightning had to figure out its own internal routing technology, right? It uses onion routing, but like it's a mini internet. Like effectively, that's what Lightning Network had to build. So you wanted to solve a payments problem, but you wound up building a telecommunications network. That's totally fascinating. And to me,
Yeah.
these are not conditional things. Like there was a different way to build Bitcoin that didn't require energy and thinking about timekeeping. There was a different way to build Lightning Network that didn't have us solving problems around networking and routing. I think these were they had to be there. These were the proximate problems. I think this is starts touch on space ideas, but if aliens were to invent Bitcoin or some similar tool to figure out how to do digital resource allocation and transfer, like in an adversarial context, like they have a society like ours, they would find that energy and timekeeping are parts of the solution. And I think if they then went on to be like this fucking slow, like we need to figure out how to make this faster, they would find that they're compelled to build some kind of internal network. And that's exactly what we are doing, where Lightning is solving problems of telecommunications and networking in an attempt to solve a payment liquidity problem. I think that's cool. And then what will happen at higher layers? Like, we're trying to solve a given problem, but we will encounter these other problems that are important for us to solve. And we didn't maybe even realize that those problems were part of it until we attempted to build that layer. But once you see that and you realize Lightning has to solve networking problems, you sort of realize that, okay, it's not just a payment system. It really is the beginnings of a metered, economically incentivized telecommunications network. Like, it's the kind of thing that we can, if we build the right incentives, if we, as developers, like launch companies and projects to like grow different parts of this, we can collectively make money by rebuilding the internet as a society. And that will be successful and robust because we don't have to regulate people to fix the internet. We don't have to do GDPR and things like this to like force good behavior. We don't have to, I have a whole rant about computer security and how Bitcoin internet fixes that. But like, ultimately, we ourselves, just by our selfishness and desire to make money, get motivated to build a better internet. And that's very cool. Like, that wasn't I don't think at the outset, the marketed goal of the Lightning Network, but I guarantee that people who are actually building the Lightning Network were thinking about that. They could see that. There's a reason that things like Sphinx Chat are able to be built so quickly after the Lightning Network starts to get some traction, because they're just plugging into the expectations that as designers and developers, people who built the Lightning Network knew would likely occur. It would become itself a basis for the settlement of other things, even though it is itself a layer that is settling back to Bitcoin. That's something that sort of, again, was known but not widely understood. And now things like Sphinx Chat show up and you're kind of doing semantic data transfer through Lightning payments. And I don't think Nostr is quite there, but a lot of people see those connections as inevitable, like not surprising to me, because of course you would choose to use, if your goal is to create economic incentives for better social networking applications, of course you would use an inherently monetized form of telecommunications, one that doesn't suffer from all the problems of trying to deploy a social app to the traditional internet.